morning, church. It is great to see everybody that's here this afternoon. We're going to be continuing our study in the book of Mark. We're trying to do one chapter per session. We're doing more of a bird's eye overview of these chapters, trying to touch on some important points, but not able to get to every point that we'd like to get to. But we're trying to get through as much text as we can each session. And we are in chapter 7 today. And in chapter 6, we remember that Jesus was in his hometown of Nazareth, and he was not accepted there to be the Son of God, which he said a prophet is not appreciated in his hometown, you know. And then John the Baptist was killed in the chapter before this, and Jesus fed the 5,000 in the chapter before this. So we find Jesus up in Galilee, on the west side of the sea, in chapter 7. So let's begin. Chapter 7 verse 1 says, "The Pharisees and some of the scribes gathered around him when they had come from Jerusalem." You remember the Pharisees were the sect of the Jews who believed in the oral tradition of the law, which is going to become important right here. And the scribes were some of the Jews who were had some sort of legal standing. They would copy the Torah and make copies. There were no copy machines, obviously. They were basically copying the Bible, making copies of that. That's what a scribe would do. And they also had some legal duties where they would act as a notary public and things like that on some legal documents. But they were considered experts in the law. So they were always the ones who were trying to trick Jesus because they knew all the Bible really well, having copied it all the time. And so they prided themselves in knowing the scriptures. And so you've got these two groups of people who are coming to him from Jerusalem, which is quite a trek all the way up to Galilee from Jerusalem. But if you go, we're not going to read it, but in John 7 verse 1, it's got the same historical narrative, and it says that Jesus wasn't going back to Judea. He was staying in Galilee because down in Judea they were trying to kill him. So he wasn't going there, so they're now coming to him. And so we've got some Pharisees and some scribes who are going to come and try to trick Jesus into doing something wrong so that they might have cause to accuse him. Then in verse 2 it says, "And these people who came, they had seen some of his disciples were eating their bread with impure hands, that is, unwashed. For the Pharisees and all the Jews did not eat unless they carefully washed their hands, thus observing the tradition of the elders." What is Mark is calling the tradition of the elders, we typically refer to as the oral law. The Jews, many of the Jews believed that when Moses gave the written law, he also was giving an explanation of the law to Aaron behind the scenes, and that this oral tradition would be carried on from generation to generation through various rabbis till it got down to Jesus' day. And so they had not only the written law, they had an oral tradition. And in about 200 AD, there were some scribes, some rabbis, what I meant to say. There were some rabbis who wanted to write it down. They decided we need to write these oral traditions down lest they become lost. And they go all the way back. These written oral traditions go back a long way, and they would have been the types of things that were being said during Jesus' day. So we're going to read one, and we're going to see what it says. So this written version of the oral tradition is called the Mishnah, and it's available on Google. You can find a PDF of it. So I was looking through the Mishnah, and I thought, what does the Mishnah say? What would they have been saying during Jesus' day about washing your hands? Because I know it's not just washing, it's more than that. So what were they saying? So I found a couple of things that, Donnie, are you the one doing it? Yeah, thank you. So this is one, to render the hands clean. Now some of these words, I don't know what they mean, and there's another document called the Talmud, which is a commentary on the Mishnah, by the way, which will tell you what a quarter log is. But anyway, a quarter log or more of water must be poured over the hands to suffice for one person or even two. A half log or more suffices for 3 persons or 4. 1 log or more suffices for 4, 5, or 10, or 100. Rabbi Jose says, provided that for the last among them there remains not less than a quarter log, more water may be added to the second water that is poured over the hands, but more may not be added to the first. It gets very cluttered. They're trying to say how much water it takes, and they're being very specific. Let's go to the next slide. We'll get more of this kind of thing. The hands are susceptible to uncleanness, and they are rendered clean by the pouring over them of the water up to the wrist. Thus, if a man had poured the first water up to the wrist and the second water beyond the wrist, and the water flowed back to the hand becomes clean. But if he poured both the first water and the second water beyond the wrist, and the water flowed back to the hand remains unclean. If he poured the first water over the one hand alone, and then he thought himself and poured the second water over both hands, they remain unclean. If he poured the first water over both hands, and then, I'm just going to stop there. Okay, so this is the kind of thing that Jesus was dealing with. Now, we have it written down here. It would have been an oral tradition to them, like how much water, what the procedure is. So this was more than just cleanliness. This was a ceremony that they wanted to be performed. And Jesus rejects the ceremony because it's something that they added to the law of God. It wasn't something that he thought needed to be done. Now, verse 4, and when they come, and then Mark is continuing to tell us about the washing tradition of the Jews. In verse 4, and when they come from the marketplace, they do not eat unless they cleanse themselves. That word cleanse is the Greek word baptizo, which is to baptize, to immerse. So it's not the pouring, it's take a bath. When they come from the marketplace, they take a bath. And there are many other things which they have received and observed, such as the washing of cups and pitchers and copper pots, how to cleanse all the vessels to make them clean for eating. So a lot of these things are addressed in the Old Testament, but they added so much stuff to it, they made it cumbersome. And God never made it that cumbersome. So he's saying when they eat, they have a certain policy of washing, pouring, and amount of water and all of this. But when they go to the marketplace, now think flea market, okay? You're intermingling with all kind of people. You're rubbing shoulders with people. You've got Gentiles there who are unclean to you. You've got Jews there, Gentiles all mixed. You've got dogs walking around. You've got all kind of dead animals being sold and all of these things. And so when they came home from the marketplace, they took a bath because they didn't want to have any kind of ceremonial uncleanness on them. And this was not required in the law of Moses. But this is just what Mark is telling us what they would do as their tradition. And Jesus is going to address their question. And so in verse 5, the Pharisees and the scribes asked him, why do your disciples not walk according to the tradition of the elders, but eat their bread with impure hands? Now what was likely happening was Jesus and his disciples would walk through the grain fields and they would just start eating. Well, they're not going to stop and do some pouring water ritual on that. They're just going to eat. And so they're saying, well, you didn't do the ritual cleansing, so you have impure hands. And I think Jesus' response probably surprised them. And he said, rightly did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites. Can you imagine you're one of the religious leaders and you're going to Jesus saying, how come you guys don't follow the tradition of the elders? Seems like maybe even an innocent legal question that you need to know, so maybe you can teach or whatever, but he says, you're a hypocrite. Because now we can't do that when somebody asks us a question, but Jesus knew the hearts of the people that were talking to him. He not only knew their heart, he knew who they were, he knew their name, he knew why they were there, he knew they came from Jerusalem, he knew everything about them. He knows what they're there to do. So he says, rightly did Isaiah prophesy of you hypocrites, as it is written. This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far away from me. But in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the precepts of men. Neglecting the commandment of God, you hold to the tradition of men. Jesus contrasts the commandment of God with the tradition of men. That's something we need to think about. There are some things we do as traditions. There are some things we do as commandments. And we need to be discerning so that we know which things are which, so we don't bind a tradition on someone. Even today, we can bind a tradition on someone that was never a commandment. And Jesus distinguishes these two things in verse 8. And he says, these people honor me with their lips. In other words, They're saying the right things, but their heart is far from me. Now, that's possible for us today. We can be doing that. We could be singing the songs. We could be singing I Raise My Ebenezer and not have any idea what we just said, which we sang tonight. We could be singing Victory in Jesus and just be mouthing the words and not be thinking, I have been victorious in Jesus Christ. We can be listening to the prayer or not listening to the prayer, checking out, going through the motions. We can show up to church and not have our heart in it, but be thinking, I did what God expected me to do, and that's good enough. We must have our heart in it. If our heart is not close to God, then our worship is nothing. There's this passage in the Old Testament where the people were playing on their instruments and singing songs of Zion, and Jesus, or God says, away with that noise. I don't even want to hear it. Because their hearts were far from him. He didn't want their worship because their hearts weren't right. So this is an admonition to us as well. So verse 9, he also was saying to them, you are experts at setting aside the commandment of God in order to keep your traditions. So they were doing tradition things that were beyond the commands, and Jesus is going to give them an example of how not only they could add on, but sometimes their add-on negated the real thing. So he comes with an example to them. He says, for Moses said, honor your father and your mother, and he who speaks evil of father or mother is to be put to death. Now, he takes the word honor to mean not only to respect, but also to take care of in their old age, right? That's how we honor them. When they don't have any money, we're in a culture here where there is no social security or anything like that, so the children had to take care financially of their parents in that culture. In verse 11, but you say, if a man says to his father or his mother, whatever I have that would help you is korban, that is to say, given to God. This is a Hebrew word which means to give to God, as is explained in the text. And the idea is some of the Jews didn't want to take care of their parents when they were old. So what they would do, they would say, everything I have belongs to the temple. I gave all my money to the temple. I can't help you because all that I have has been dedicated to God, as if it's a bigger thing, right? I'm going to give my money to God. I can't help you in your old age. Jesus said, when you do that, you're violating the commandment to honor your father and your mother. And by the way, the New Testament teaches the same thing. Paul tells Timothy that if a man can't take care of his family, he's worse than an unbeliever. So we are also commanded to take care of our elderly in their old age, our family members. So, giving your money to the temple and saying, I've dedicated it to the temple as if it's something higher, Jesus said, that is not okay. You take care of your parents. God doesn't need your money. Your parents need your money. Verse 12, you no longer permit him to do anything for his father or his mother, thus invalidating the word of God by your tradition which you have handed down. And you do many things such as that. So Jesus gives them an example that the tradition of the elders violates the law of God. It doesn't always have to violate the law of God, but when you raise it to a level of law and you say you have to wash your hands this way or something like that, then it becomes wrong. Verse 14. After he called the crowd to him again, he began saying to them, listen to me, all of you, and understand. There is nothing outside the man which can defile him if it goes into him. But the things which proceed out of the man are what defiles the man. If anyone has ears to hear, let him hear. Jesus is talking about eating food with unwashed hands. That's what he's still talking about. So he's saying, if you eat food that comes into your body, it's not going to defile you spiritually, is what he's talking about. It's not going to defile you spiritually, is what he meant. But his disciples didn't understand what he meant. Then in verse 17, when he had left the crowd and entered the house, his disciples questioned him about the parable. And he said to them, are you so lacking in understanding also? Do you not understand that whatever goes into the man from outside cannot defile him? Because it does not go into his heart, but into his stomach and is eliminated. The idea here is, the Greek says, goes into the sewer. So you eat something, it goes through your body, out into the sewer, but it doesn't go into your heart. And then Mark adds a little parenthetical phrase here, thus he declared all foods clean. And so if somebody tells you today that you can only eat certain types of foods to be biblical, this passage, Jesus declares all foods to be okay to eat. Verse 20, and he was saying, that which proceeds out of the man, that is what defiles the man. For from within, out of the heart of men, proceed the evil thoughts, fornications, thefts, murders, adulteries, deeds of coveting and wickedness, as well as deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, and foolishness. All these evil things proceed from within and defile the man. Jesus is saying, they accused him of eating with unwashed hands and putting things into his body, making him ritually unclean. And he's saying, you don't even recognize your problem, and your problem is you're unclean in here in your heart. Your heart is not right. He said, it's not the stuff that goes in your mouth that makes you unclean. It's the stuff that comes out of your heart that makes you unclean, because it reveals who you are. We are what we think, what we meditate on. That is who we are. We are on what we think and meditate. And when we think and meditate on evil thoughts, fornication, stealing, murder, adultery, coveting, wickedness, lying, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, foolishness. We're thinking about these things. It comes out in our behavior. And when it comes out of us, it reveals the darkness of who we are. The problem is the heart. Jesus is pointing not to the physical, but to the heart. And that's our lesson for that. We need to be thinking about who we are in our heart. What do we meditate on? What do we think about most often? Verse 24. Jesus got up and went away from there to the region of Tyre, and when he had entered a house, he wanted no one to know of it, yet he could not escape notice. Can we go to the next slide to see our map? We have been, this is Jerusalem down here. We have been in Galilee. This is the Sea of Galilee. Jesus spent most of his time around Galilee. But the Jewish area stops right in here. But he wants to get away from everybody. He's tired of dealing with stuff. He wants to take his 12 apostles away and have some private time to teach them. And he needs some time alone with them. And so he goes all the way up here to Gentile country, to Tyre. And then in a little bit in our chapter, he's going to meet a woman in Sidon. He's going to go north, even further. And then he's going to come around all the way over here to the Decapolis, which is another Gentile area. Everything on the east side of the Jordan River over here is Gentile area. So he's going to Gentile areas now because he's trying to get away from the people who are trying to trick him. He's constantly bombarded with having to heal people. He wants to go where nobody knows who he is. And he goes to this house, and the Bible says he doesn't want anybody to know he's there. He wants some alone time with his disciples. Yet he could not escape notice. Verse 25. But after hearing of him, a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately came and fell at his feet. So this lady's got a little daughter. We don't know how old, but it's unusual. I think this is the only time that I remember in the New Testament that there's a demon-possessed person who's a child. But this person is evidently a child, says she was a little daughter, and she had a demon. And this demon was haunting her. So this woman wants this daughter to be healed. So she hears Jesus is in town. What are the likely odds that Jesus is going to be in your town if you live in Tyre? Not great. So when she hears he's there, she's excited about it. And one of the other gospel accounts tells us that she comes to him and addresses him as the son of David, which means she was a Gentile woman, but she knew exactly who he was. She recognized him as the Messiah. She knew enough about Jewish prophecy to call him the son of David. Well, she falls at his feet in verse 25. Verse 26, now the woman was a Gentile of the Syro-Phoenician race, and she kept asking him to cast the demon out of her daughter. And one of the other accounts says that Jesus told her to leave him alone. And she goes outside and she's screaming at his disciples. She's yelling at them. They come in and say, Jesus, you got to do something about this lady. She's yelling at us. And so Jesus deals with it. And so in verse 27, he says to her, let the children be satisfied first, for it is not good to take the children's bread and throw it to the dogs. There's two words here of importance, children and dogs. He's calling the children the Jews. Jesus said he came for the lost sheep of the house of Israel. That's his mission. The Gentiles are not his mission. The Gentiles wouldn't be the mission of the gospel until Acts 10. But right now his mission is to the Jews. But she outsmarts him. But by the way, this word dog, there are two words for dog in the New Testament. One is an adult dog that would be walking around the town, who would be eating trash and was disgusting and was unclean. You wouldn't want to touch it, you wouldn't want to be around it. There's another word for dog, which is like a little house pet, a little puppy. And that's what this one is. He's talking to her, and not in a derogatory way, but he's saying, we've got the children live in the house, the dogs are the pets, and you're not the children. You're not the inheritance. I'm not talking to you. He said, I want to give the food to the children, then maybe there might be some bread for the dogs, and come back and see me in about 10 years. Verse 28, but she answered and said to him, yes, Lord, but even the dogs under the table feed on the children's crumbs. And Jesus was struck by that response, how wise that she was. And he says to her, because of this answer, go, the demon has gone out of your daughter. Jesus didn't go to the place to cast the demon out. He didn't say a word to cast the demon out. He just says to her, the demon has gone. All he had to do was think the thought, and anything he wanted to be done would be done. And that's what he did. So he says, you go home, your demon has gone out of your daughter. And going back to her home, she found the child lying on the bed, the demon having left. Our last little section starts in verse 31. Again he went out from there to the region of Tyre and came through Sidon to the Sea of Galilee within the region of the Decapolis. So we're Tyre, you go up to Sidon, here's the Phoenicia area, the Syro-Phoenician woman lives here, goes to Sidon, and then he comes down, and he doesn't go on the west side of Galilee where all the Jews are, he goes to the east side of Galilee, to the Decapolis. All these little red dots are 10 cities called the Decapolis, which means 10 cities. He's been here before. Jesus was here before when he healed the man with the legion of demons. And he said, you go to your house and you tell people what the Lord did for you. So Jesus would be known in some places over here, but he would be known a lot more over here. And right now, he's trying to have some alone time. But it's interesting, he goes up to Sidon. We don't know what happened in Sidon. It doesn't tell us. But we know that he's, it says in John that if we wrote down everything he did, the books wouldn't even contain it. So we have some highlights. But anyway, in verse 32, he comes to the Decapolis, where he had healed the man with the legion of demons. And they brought to him one who was deaf and spoke with difficulty, and they implored him to lay his hands on him. Jesus took him aside from the crowd by himself and put his fingers into his ears. And after spitting, he touched his tongue with the saliva. And looking up to heaven with a deep sigh, he said to him, Ephphatha, that is, be opened. And his ears were opened, and the impediment of his tongue was removed, and he began speaking plainly. And he gave them orders not to tell anyone, but the more he ordered them, the more widely they continued to proclaim it. They were utterly astonished, saying, He has done all things well. He makes even the deaf to hear and the mute to speak. Jesus, it's so interesting watching Jesus' miracles, because sometimes he'll think it, sometimes he'll say it, sometimes he'll lay his hands on someone, sometimes people touch the hem of his garment, and in this case we have a man who's deaf, and so he's using physical touch on the deaf man as a sort of a sign language, putting his finger in his ears so he can feel it, puts his own spit on his tongue to heal this man. Jesus does these miracles whatever way he wants to do them that day. And this is the way he chose to heal this man that day. But he tells him not to tell anyone what he's done. But of course, it says he did it anyway, which I can understand. You want to tell people who healed you, but Jesus was trying to keep his popularity down. Evidently, the legion man who was possessed by a legion of demons had preached so much that his fame was already spreading over there, and he wanted to tone it down a bit, because Jesus needs to make sure that he has times to himself with his disciples, and that he has the full amount of time he had allotted for his ministry before people keep trying to kill him and make him the king, or kill him, or something like that. So in this chapter, as a broad overview, I think the most challenging part to me is in verse 6, where Jesus said, "The people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me." And I think this can be our challenge for tonight, and we need to think about that. Do you ever check out in church? I'm not asking you to answer out loud, but do you sometimes just check out? Do you sometimes sing the songs and not even think about what you're singing, and you don't even know the words you just said? Do you sometimes during a prayer check out and not listen to the words of the prayer and not make them your prayer? Sometimes in your own prayers, are they meaningful, or do you not pray enough? How are we doing in our relationship with God? It's easy to fall into complacency. It's easy to fall into lukewarmness. And we need to check our hearts to make sure that our heart is connected to Jesus. Then he wants to hear our praise. Then he wants to hear our prayers. Then he wants to hear our songs. So let's think about these things, and let me ask you how you're doing. Are you ready to meet Jesus on the throne of judgment? If you are, God's blessings on you. If you are not, we're going to offer you an opportunity to make things right with God. So if you have a spiritual need of any kind, we invite you to come forward as we stand and sing together.